Okay, we need to talk about the whole New Zealand media thing, okay? I was intending on doing like a full video on this, but the the headline this morning certainly was an interesting one. So normally I write scripts for these things. Today I've decided not to, just because I'm fucking lazy. Okay, that's it. Kia ora, my name's Kimmy and I talk about Formula One in the world's second worst accent. And I'm also going to read an article from a New Zealand news outlet, shall we say. So we here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we very much like our sports, okay? We are a sporting nation, if you will. Unfortunately, those sports historically haven't really included Formula One. We have had some very, very famous F1 drivers, for instance, Bruce McLaren, Denny Hulme, Brendan Hartley. But, you know, we only tend to really care about the sport when we have a driver who is competing in it, or in some certain instances, like growing up, I do remember the news generally reporting on F1 in the sports news when Schumacher was dominating and when Häkkinen was winning. But it's been a very long time since the New Zealand media has really given much of a ish about F1 in general. And obviously, as I've mentioned in the past, now that Liam Lawson has a permanent seat, supposedly, we do suddenly care about it, which does make it quite challenging on Mondays when you're trying to avoid spoilers for the race, because I like to watch races unspoiled and I can't watch the race. Well, I can watch the race before Monday night, but I prefer not to, because I like to enjoy it and experience it for the first time with Biz, because we are an F1 household. It's always a little bit of a Debbie Downer when Biz comes home and I know what the race outcome is and he doesn't. To be fair, sometimes he forgets to change the radio station to the wonderful Brian FM, local radio station here that doesn't have any news, and he leaves it on Hodaki and then turns it on when he gets in the car and gets spoiled by somebody mentioning what happened. But that's beside the point. The point is, suddenly the New Zealand news media cares about F1 when previously it generally didn't. Which is annoying, because you can get spoiled if you go on the internet or if you turn on the TV or the radio, but it's even more annoying because they don't know how to report on it. And this headline is a really great example of that. So I guess the first thing that I learned after this weekend's Miami GP is that the New Zealand media still doesn't understand F1. Now, I am going to read this article in its entirety, so just skip forwards like, I don't know, 30 seconds a minute. I'll put a timestamp in so that you can skip past it if you don't want to hear me read it. I am going to read it in its entirety because I think it is something that we need to discuss about how the New Zealand media could potentially do a little bit better. So the headline is, Formula One driver who ruined Liam Lawson's race in Miami reportedly set to lose his seat. We'll get back to that in a minute. The driver who hit Liam Lawson at the first corner of the Miami Grand Prix and ruined his race is reportedly set to lose his Formula One seat before the next race weekend. Australian rookie Jack Doohan has been under pressure at Alpine ever since the French team signed Argentine driver Franco Colapinto during the off-season. Several media outlets, including the BBC, ESPN and Dutch newspaper De Telegraaf, which broke the news that Lawson was being dumped by Red Bull earlier this season, have reported that a switch could be made before the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. Formula One heads to Europe for the first time this season over the weekend of May 6th to 18th, with the 7th Grand Prix of the year taking place at the Autodromo I can never say this. Autodromo Internazionale Enzo Dino Ferrari. It's shocking. Sorry about that. In Imola in Italy. The BBC reported that insiders say the switch with Colapinto is close to being finalised. ESPN reported that a plan to put Colapinto in the car for Imola gathered pace in Miami. The Telegraph said Doohan was expected to be replaced before the next Grand Prix. Doohan outqualified his teammate Pierre Gasly in a Grand Prix for the first time this season in Miami. He had previously outqualified him for the sprint race in China. Props to getting that correct. His race didn't last one lap, however, as he suffered irreparable damage when he hit Lawson at the first turn at the Miami International Autodrome. The Kiwi Racing Bulls driver had started one place behind Doohan in 15th, but was ahead of him well before the corner and was following the same line as Yuki Tsunoda, the driver who replaced him at Red Bull after round 2 in front of him. I don't really know what happened, Lawson said afterwards, having soldiered on for the best part of 37 laps with a damaged floor and right side pod, blows that ruined his race. I had a really good launch and a gap opened up through the middle in turn 1, so I took it and then I just felt a hit from the inside. I need to have a look back, but obviously it's destroyed the floor and we have to retire. Interviewing Doohan after the race, F1 media personality Lawrence Burrito suggested to him that Lawson kind of cut across you. Editing Kimmy here. Calling Lawrence Burrito a F1 media personality is doing that man an immense disservice. He is a journalist. I'm begging you, have some journalistic respect. I don't want to comment. I haven't seen the replay yet, Doohan replied. As we all know, nothing would be intentional. Unfortunately, I got squeezed there. I don't know, maybe he had a car on his outside and we just have to look into it because it didn't end well for me and I don't think it helped him out as well. Doohan and Lawson are 2 of 4 drivers not to have scored a point through 6 Grand Prix this season. Aston Martin veteran Fernando Alonso and Sauber rookie Gabriel Bortoleto are the other 2. Alpine stand to gain sponsorship money from Colapinto's South American backers. He raced for Williams at 9 Grand Prix last year, scoring points on 2 occasions in Azerbaijan and the United States. So there are a lot of factually correct things in there, things that can be verified just by reading the Wikipedia pages. For instance, where Doohan's qualified, where Colapinto has scored points, things like that. But there's a very key moment of bias in here, and that is the fact that they claim that Lawson hit Doohan. So if you go back and actually watch the replay, you could argue that yes, Doohan did hit Liam, if you really wanted to. But what actually happened is that Lawson took the corner in very, very tight. He was technically ahead. He did enter the corner ahead, but he had a hell of a lot of room on the outside that he could have actually used to give Doohan a little bit more space. Now, if you're Jack, you're just trying to make the corner within track limits and not cut straight across it. You're looking at that apex. Yes, you are looking in your mirrors, but there is a responsibility on the driver coming up behind you that they don't force you into a position that means that you're going to make contact. And that's effectively what Liam Lawson did. He did have room on his outside to give Jack a little bit more space. However, he decided he was going to go for the apex. What that resulted in is Jack's front left wheel hitting Liam Lawson's side pod. That's what happened. Jack didn't really have anywhere to go because he had an Aston Martin literally right up his ass. If he had braked out of it, then he would have caused a collision coming from behind. Jack was stuck between a rock and a hard place. He didn't really have many places to go there other than realizing what Lawson was trying to do and just completely cutting the corner. And if that had happened, let's just take that back again, there's actually a pretty damn good chance that he would have gone right into the side of Yuki Tsunoda. NZ media, your bias is showing. And we know that we like to big up our sports people, particularly when they are competing in international sporting events that we don't often see our guys in, okay? We have Kiwis in tennis, we are constantly talking about them. We have Kiwis in motor racing, we are constantly talking about them. Kiwis in boxing, we are constantly talking about them because these are sports where we don't see our guys compete in international high level very often because at the end of the day, we're a tiny nation of 5 and a bit million people down at the bottom of the South Pacific, right? Basically, we have the population of LA in our entire country, which is slightly larger than the United Kingdom. So when we have somebody competing on the world stage, yes, we like to big up them, but it's also really important that our reporting doesn't become so biased that it is blatantly telling untruths about other sports people, which is essentially what happened here. Because yes, Lawson and Doohan did make contact. However, I don't think that it's fair to make it sound almost malicious and deliberate that Jack hit Liam. And then also to make it seem like this is kind of the killing blow to Jack's career when everyone has kind of known that at some point this year he's going to be replaced by Colapinto anyway. Everyone's known that it's going to happen. It's not like this is the last nail in the coffin. It's just been a waiting game until essentially Alpine can draw out more sponsorship money from Colapinto sponsors. That's what's going on here, right? Let's not beat around the bush. Basically, Jack got some sponsorship money from I believe it was the Selling Sunset guy, and now Alpine is using that to leverage Colapinto sponsors for a bit more cash for the remainder of the season. We're reaching the point now in Alpine where depending on how much money you're prepared to pay, that is how many races you're going to get. Anyway, that's enough on the do-in situation, on the NZ media situation. Basically, I'm not super impressed by the way that the New Zealand media is reporting on F1. Frankly, I think that they should probably pick up the phone or fire off an email to somebody like Josh Ravel and actually get some opinions from people who know F1 before they put these articles live, because it makes you look stupid. And it's also incredibly condescending and patronising to Kiwi F1 fans. The concept that we're only interested in F1 in this country if we have a New Zealander who is actually competing in the sport. There are many, many of us out here who watch this sport regardless of whether or not there is a New Zealander or even an Australian competing in the sport. And to kind of only give us information in tidbits, unless it's some huge big news like who won the World Championship or if somebody had a massive, horrifying crash, we don't get anything. So do better. Either get somebody who understands F1 like in your sports newsroom, or start talking to internet commentators, basically. Moving on, the number 2 thing that I learned after this weekend, I didn't learn it, let's be honest, I've talked about this before, but I was reminded of it, is that stands be crazy. I'm not going to share any posts or anything like that. I don't want that. I have no interest in kind of generating a direct online discourse towards other people that often, like when it comes to these kind of things and sports and anything that makes people really passionate, can sometimes result in pretty horrible things like death threats, right? Like I don't want to encourage that, but we do need to talk a little bit about how certain driver stands and team stands can be very, very, very intense on social media. And a really great example of this is the Alex v. Carlos situation that we had going on Sunday. Now, how do I put this? I've seen some people online who have been making it seem like what went on between the Williams drivers is some kind of plot against Carlos Sainz. Okay then, that's a take so hot you may as well call it a white dwarf. Like I don't really know how you can make that reach. People have kind of cited the fact that Alex was given priority, that he was allowed to pass when Carlos asked that he didn't, that Alex wasn't given his last set of unused mediums during the sprint when the tyre change came. And I've got a couple of little kind of, not smackdowns on that, but a little bit of further, you have to put all this whole thing into context, okay? The reality is that during SQ2, Carlos Sainz went out for one run and he locked up and he flat spotted the medium tyre that he was on. Okay? The fact that Carlos Sainz only went out for one run on that medium indicates to me that that medium was probably intended to be his sprint tyre. When they would have intended to use that tyre, I imagine it would have been the one that they planned to use during the sprint should it rain. Because Carlos had 2 sets of new hard tyres before the Grand Prix on Sunday. So that says that had it been a dry sprint, his intended tyre was a hard. Now granted, that is also on the team because realistically they probably should have put him on the hard tyre for the rest of the sprint because he probably wasn't going to score points anyway. Now, why would you keep a second set of hard tyres for Grand Prix Sunday, I hear you ask? Well, here's the thing. Miami, historically, does tend to cause a little bit of carnage. It makes sense to have extra hards because if there is some kind of chaos at the start of the race and you need to put on a new set of tyres, then you can go longer and you don't completely screw your race up because you have to do 3 or 4 stops. And it is one step softer as well this weekend than what we've had in the past in Miami. Then the other fact that you have about exactly what went on with Carlos and Alex, and I've seen some people who have really been ripping into Alex about what happened at the start at turn 3. I would encourage you to go back and actually watch what happened. Essentially what happened is Carlos was coming into turn 3. Lando lost a bunch of places. Lando was on the inside of the corner on the runoff. Lando rejoins the track. Carlos has to take avoiding action to avoid hitting Lando, and Alex is already in the process of making the pass, and they made contact. That's what happened. It's a racing incident. It was effectively caused by Lando losing places at the start and having to take to the runoff to make sure that he didn't hit anyone else. Shit happens. This is not anything malicious on Alex's part. Carlos got caught up behind some other cars. Alex decided that he's going to take the opportunity to get past and get in front, which personally I think is the right choice because Alex is on new tires. He's going to be quicker. Unfortunately, Carlos has to take avoiding action in the middle of that passing maneuver. And then you factor in like that apparently Carlos did have a little bit of damage. That's probably causing a little bit of downforce loss. That's going to be causing a little bit more tire deg. Realistically, I think that choosing to allow Alex go is the right call. I don't think that having them in a DRS train for 40 odd laps is the smart thing to do, because I don't think they were going to come 6th and 7th. I think they would have ended up 7th and 9th. So having a 5th and 9th is more preferable than a 7th and a 9th. I just think everyone out there who's really getting into Williams and Alex and James Vowles needs to calm down and just remember that not everything is a conspiracy against your fave. Like, he's my fave too. I was just really glad that it didn't rain during the Grand Prix because let's be honest, Carlos Sainz's form in the wet, not been that great recently. When was the last time he finished a race when it rained? I actually don't know. Maybe I should look that stat up. Calm the f down, okay? I know you love your faves. I know you want to defend them. Saying that teams are deliberately sabotaging their drivers is just crazy talk. Like, I'm sorry, that's stupid. What are you talking about? Sorry. That was a lot of F-bombs. Number 3. Let's just come back to what I said a few videos ago about Charles and Lewis's driving styles. I can't remember which video it was, but it was a couple ago. I made the comment that Fred Vasseur and Ferrari have been gaslighting the F1 fandom into thinking that Charles and Lewis have similar driving styles when they don't. They're very nearly polar opposite. They seem similar, but they're not. The third thing that I learned this weekend is that Ferrari hasn't just made a little bit of an error and hasn't really been developing very well this season. They have fundamentally cocked up their whole concept for the year. So basically like what we looked at through 23 and 24 is 22, 23, it was a quick car, right? It could qualify on pole. The problem was that they had tire deg issues. They got on top of that in 24. They just had their kind of slump in the middle where they decided not to listen to either of their drivers and went down a rabbit hole that didn't pay out anything, essentially. I think that what's happened is Ferrari has gone, when they've signed Lewis Hamilton and the deal's done and they've signed on the dotted line, gone, okay, we know that Lewis drives in a fundamentally very different way to Charles. They have some small similarities, but it is effectively a very different driving style. And we know that he has not been so great at adapting the last few years. He's been with the same team for a very long time. We need to construct a car that is at least a little bit suited to Lewis so that we can get the most out of this huge investment that we've just made. And we don't lose face because our 7-time world champion that we've just signed is getting P11, P12, P15. So what they do is they go, okay, right, current car concept, it's in the bin. We're going to shift our suspension concept. We're not going to get the feedback from Carlos Sainz for our next year's car because that's like dumb free. Why would we do that? So they've got Charles Leclerc give them feedback that's helping them develop this 2025 car. What they've effectively done is they have built a car by trying to suit both drivers. They have built a car that suits neither. And not only does it suit neither, but it is slow. And whether or not it's slower than last year's car, you're never really going to know, because there's a few different factors, especially when you consider that this weekend in Miami, yes, you could compare like for like. However, this year they were using one step softer compound of tires. And also obviously like track conditions, that kind of thing, they're all different. So they've built a car that is, if anything, probably roughly equally as slow or fast, however you want to say it, as last year's car. However, they now have a car that neither of their drivers can drive to the absolute limit. In trying to suit everyone, they have suited nobody. I reckon that last year's car if they ran it for a race, would probably perform better than this year's. So yeah, there we go. 3 things that I learned from this year's Miami Grand Prix, or 3 things that I had cemented in my brain. So what do you think? Are you one of these driver stands who thinks that everyone is out to get your fave? Do you think the New Zealand media is just flat out trolling Kiwi F1 fans? And are you completely delusional and think that Ferrari is going to pull it out of the bag and somehow win the Constructors title this year? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget, if you enjoy my videos, please subscribe to my channel. Please like this video. Channel birthday, August 21st, 1,000 subscribers. Help me get there. I haven't got a final thought prepared. However, I think it's a good time to remind everyone that it's only sports. Sports are entertainment. Yeah, there's a lot of money involved. And yeah, we get really passionate about it. But at the end of the day, it's just fucking sports. And having said that, I will absolutely dogpile on anyone who calls my favourites washed. There's a joke, by the way. I wouldn't. I barely talk to anyone online. Like, I'm a terrified little mouth. Out there in the world, I'm confident, I'm loud. Online, I don't like it. I don't like it. It's scary.